Yeah, this is 2.6, and then Tuesday, Wednesday is 2.7. So solving inequalities with absolute values are very, very similar to solving equations with absolute values, and also very, very similar to, all the other things we've been doing. So what we're looking at here is that our distance, remember this is the distance from 0, is less than 3. Which means if we think about it in terms of a number line, it cannot be more than 3 spaces from 0. So it could go 1, 2, 3 spaces this way, or it could go 1, 2, 3 spaces this way. So our absolute value is somewhere in between, right? See that? So what we're going to do when we're solving these is we're going to have to remember that we're talking about the distance, and often we're going to wind up with a couple of cases. Sometimes it's going to be that we can put our absolute value, once it's isolated, in between, like this. It could be that we wind up with a has to be farther than, in which case we'll have a bigger than and a smaller than. But for something like this, this is an in-between. My distance is less. So it's in between. So our interval notation for this is going to be -3 to +3. Absolute values are all about that distance. The distance is less than 3. So on this one, our distance is less than 4. So we take the absolute value and we set that piece up as our inequality. If that distance is less than 4, it means it's got to be between 4 and -4, right? So this is going to be -4 is less than 2x plus 5 is less than 4. That x looks weird. There we go. You see that? We are going to subtract sides, not from both sides, from all sides. But yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to subtract 5 from here. We're going to subtract 5 from here. We're going to subtract 5 from over here. So we're going to have -9 is less than 2x is less than -1. And then what do we do? Divide by 2 on all sides. So we've got -9/2 is less than x is less than -1/2. So our interval notation for this is going to be my -9/2 to -1/2 with parentheses on both because it never equals. And x is between, so it's just the 1 unit. Okay? So they're a little bigger on this side. So we got the absolute value of 2 minus 3x all over 5 is greater than or equal to 2. So again, we're thinking about our distance. Our distance is bigger than 2. Think about that on like a number line here. It's got to be farther away from 2 to go that way, or it's still farther from 2 if it goes this way, right? So we're going to set up 2 cases. split it into cases, where we're going to have our 2 minus 3x over 5 is less than or equal to negative 2, or my absolute value, so that 2 minus 3x over 5 is greater than or equal to 2. So sometimes to sketch it out on a number line really helps with seeing the two possible cases, because I know my distance has to be farther away from 0. Questions on the setup part? Okay. Just checking in. What are we going to do with the 5? Multiply by the 5. Times 5 on all the sides. We have so many sides. Times 5. Times 5. And you can work both cases at the same time if you want to, because they're generally going to use the same operations. Or you can do it as two separate thought trains. It does not matter. So these 5s cancel out, and we're going to get 2 minus 3x is less than or equal to negative 10. On the other case, we're going to have 2 minus 3x is greater than or equal to positive 10. Then what are we going to do? Subtract the 2 from all the places. And we're left with minus 3x is less than or equal to negative 12. And minus 3x is greater than or equal to 8. Then what? Divide by negative 3 and switch the sign. Whenever I multiply or divide by a negative number, I tend to toss a star under the sign so I pay attention to it, or an arrow, or a highlighted, or something to make us remember, gotta change that sign. When we multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to flip the sign. So we're gonna have x greater than or equal to positive 4, and x less than or equal to negative 8/3. When we get our solutions, we should still wind up with arrows that point outwards. So just how we started it with 2 arrows that pointed outwards, when we get to the bottom, they should still point outwards. So my x is greater than or equal to 4 will look like this. Okay, that arrow doesn't work when it's squished. And negative 8/3 is somewhere down here, definitely smaller than 4. Doesn't matter specifically, but my x has to be less than. So we still wind up with outwards pointing arrows. They're both going out. So to put this in our interval notation, come and write one for each of the pieces. If x is less than negative 8/3, what is the smallest that's going to be? Negative infinity. And I cannot touch that. What is the biggest it's going to be? Negative 8/3. And that one gets a bracket. Then we're going to do for the other segment. So we have our smallest on the other piece, 4, and it can equal that, so we use a bracket. And the biggest, positive infinity. It's an idea, so I cannot touch it, so we use a parenthesis. The way we say both of these, U. It is the union of the sets. We've used union before more in stats. Like in Algebra 2, we do a whole stats unit uses those. But it's just the union. All it means is yes. Same thing as putting an and in between. Okay? So sometimes they're a little long looking, but they're not the worst. So let's do the other one. This is the last one for today. Make it bigger. So there we go. 3 over the absolute value of 5 minus 2x is less than 2. We have a fraction that is kind of gross. What do we do to make it not be a fraction? Multiply by the denominator. An absolute value is never negative. So we can multiply by this and not have to change our sign. Right? Because we're not multiplying by a negative number because it's an absolute value. So it's totally valid to do this. 5 minus 2x times the absolute value of 5 minus 2x. So this piece and that piece are going to cancel out, leaving us with 3 is less than 2 times the absolute value of 5 minus 2x. What do I need to do next? Divide by 2. You have to get the absolute value by itself before we try and split it into cases. So this 2 cancels out. And we're left with 3 halves is less than the absolute value of 5 minus 2x. Okay, you okay on that part? Okay, so then we're into this distance is bigger than 3 halves. So the distance is greater, which means we're going to have farther away arrows. They're pointing out. So we're going to set up as our either or cases. So we're going to have that maybe 5 minus 2x is going to actually be greater than 3 over 2. Or 5 minus 2x is going to be smaller than negative 3 over 2. It's okay if we flip the sides to make it easier to think about. I need this side to be bigger than 3 halves or smaller than negative 3 halves. Okay. What next? Do what? Subtract. Yeah. Subtract what? 5. Minus 5 from everybody. So I'm left with minus 2x is greater than 3 halves minus 5. So 5 in terms of 2, so it's 10 halves. So 3 minus 10 halves becomes negative 7 halves. Or minus 2x is less than minus 13 halves. Common denominator. Probably the easier way to do this since we don't have calculators. Questions on that stuff? We're like 3 steps from being done. What are we going to do next? Divide by negative 2, and an alarm bell goes off in my brain because I need to watch out for that sign. Divide by negative 2. Divide by negative 2. Divide by negative 2. So we're going to have x is less than what? Positive 14. Not 14. When I divide by 2, what's that going to change? Changes my denominator. Positive 7 over 4. Or x is greater than 13 over 4. So again, I'm going to draw myself a little number line here. 7/4 is smaller than 13/4. We've got our x is less than, not equal to, 7/4. And that our x is greater than, not equal to 13/4. Drawing out little sketches like this definitely is helpful when writing the interval notation. It's not required for these, but sometimes it's helpful because when we put it in interval notation, it does need to be smallest to biggest. So our smallest here is -infinity to 7/4. And it cannot equal it, so we use a parenthesis, or 13/4 to +infinity. And when we have two intervals or more, you put a U in between them. So if you wind up with 3 intervals or more intervals, you just put a U. Okay? Have a great long weekend. I do have here chapter review, because our unit exam is next Friday. So it's a packet. I've got them. I'm gonna. I'll pass out because we got 3 minutes. Go to pass out. So that you can start working on it, because it has a lot of practice problems. If you can do everything in this packet, you are in great shape for the unit exam next week. Okay? So try stuff. We will have time to work on stuff tomorrow. Remember, we do still have Tuesday and Wednesday notes, so there's going to be stuff in here we haven't talked about yet. Do not be afraid of that. Okay? Still have notes Tuesday and Wednesday. So we have. Yeah. That'll be, what we'll talk about. I'm so excited for Tuesday and Wednesday. So if you're curious, Tuesday and Wednesday we're going to talk about problems like 9, H, or G. So you should be able to do everything else. Okay? Everything else you've done. We're gonna rock it. We're gonna rock it.
Can I bring my grade up from a C? Like, is that possible?
Yes.
I have to get like 100%.
We've been less than a month. We're gonna have more quizzes. We're gonna have more exams.
Well, that was missing a lot.
Huh?
That was missing a lot.
Yeah, that's because that one's been out for almost 2 weeks, and that one's been out for like a day.
Where'd you get them from?
Amazon. I have a whole box of like fidget things. I just don't put these out because
They're really loud.
they're very loud. So, and then these almost always die real fast.
Ooh, I'll take one.
The tiny Rubik's Cubes are, the action on them is so terrible. Like, oh, yeah, they feel bad. Like, if you use it as a fidget, it's not awful, but the motion on it is so bad. Yeah. See, if someone that with this kind of skill tries to use that tiny
Oh yeah, I
one,
already did that.
they're awful.
Sorry.
It is both tight and loose at the same time. I don't know how.
I couldn't find you at lunch, so.
But my mom buys out my Amazon wish list, and so I get a lot of things. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great long weekend. Yes, I do have a Taylor Swift one, and I'm gonna go see the movie. I got tickets yesterday.